Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jason France. I'm a public school parent and a former employee of the Louisiana Department of Education in the Data Collections, Analysis, and Reporting Department. I want to start by saying that the bill that we have before us appears to be based on an ALEC template, the Student Data Accessibility, Transparency, and Accountability Act. It is not a privacy bill. It is a transparency and an accessibility bill, for sure. I'll grant you that, but there's nothing related to privacy that I saw in here, except perhaps the privacy of the Department of Education to prevent parents from finding out what's going on. FERPA specifically allows states to go further to protect student data and privacy. I just thought I'd mention that. Now, FERPA has some restrictions, but it does allow states to further restrict things. So I think I wanted to make that clear. Some people didn't realize that, but that's one of the key provisions of FERPA. I wanted to say that Bills 536 and 449 share some of the same flaws. They seem to be fairly similar. Both bills failed to restrict data to usage to educational purposes. Now, I saw there was an amendment that seemed to, Amendment 7, that was inserted that seems to put that back in. One of the problems with that Amendment 7 is that if you include this, it kind of guts most of the bill in terms of even having BESI required to approve data collections and releases. So it says students they can release the data for educational purposes if they decide to, without any kind of consent or notification. That's what we have today. So if you include Amendment 7, you're restoring us, you're basically, you might as well just throw a bill out. It doesn't do much more at that point. So this bill seems to allow data sharing to go beyond what FERPA allows. So it allows the BESI and the state to allow data sharing for any reason, not for educational purposes, for commercial purposes, for anything. They can take the student data and just sell it for a dime to any aggregator they want. As long as there's a state law or BESI concurs, they can do it. Now, FERPA would probably restrict that, but that would tie up the court system, so we'd have a problem with that. Neither bills contain restrictions on third-party redisclosures or access to the data, which FERPA currently inadequately governs. So that's one of the problems we have, is when you give data to a vendor for a specific purpose, maybe it's an educational purpose, maybe it's something else, there's no restrictions on what they then choose to use that data for. So they can use that data to give to employers to vet their employees. So students that have discipline records may be restricted from ever getting an employment because there's an employer use those records that they have for doing other purposes. They can use that to filter out employees based on discipline records, special education needs, anything else. There's no restrictions on that, and this bill does not have any. I would encourage folks to add some redisclosure prohibitions and penalties. The restrictions are weak that BESI can authorize any sharing agreement for any reason. This would permit an in-bloom situation that upset so many of us in the first place. So allowing that, this is not addressing the problem that brought so many of us here. So if you pass this in its form, it's not, we're still going to be coming back. So I don't, right? Right. All right. So I don't think that that's going, that exception to allow BESI to authorize this, if they decide to, it's cool, but that's not going to address the problems. There's a lack of penalties for even flagrant violations, as happened with the in-bloom situation with the release of Social Security numbers. I worked at the department. We have another ID that I worked on called GUID, which is not the state Social Security number, which the department was supposed to send. They didn't. They didn't do it repeatedly, and that's why in-bloom canceled the agreement with the state, because they refused to send information they already had in their possession, and now nobody can hold them accountable for that, and I think that's a problem. There's no requirement that MOUs governing sharing agreements be published ever, let alone in a timely fashion. So now, while I agree that there needs to be more transparency on why we're collecting data, and I think that it's important that we only collect data that we actually need, we don't have any kind of requirement that the MOUs that allow these sharing agreements with all these corporations be published. I had to submit multiple record requests to the department, so did other folks, and go through like hundreds of pages of scanned images of emails to determine what was going on. And it took months. And then I ended up writing and informing the public about what was happening. But that's ridiculous. That's after the fact. You need to have this stuff up front so people and parents can comment on it ahead of time. So that's about all I have to say. So thank you.
We're trying to answer your questions. Amendment 7 is a regurgitation of the FERPA law. That is the FERPA law, and all it says is we have to abide with the FERPA law, which is federal law. We don't have a choice. So that's all Amendment 7 does. We're trying to find the other parts of the bills to address your issues, but unfortunately we're getting scrambled. So Senator Walsworth has a question, I think.
I guess I've got it to the chair and I guess to Jenny. Is there a way, and I think we all understand over the last year, or especially over the last year, no one trusts government, and I get it. I mean, I understand that, and I'm a parent too. And is there a way that we can identify some minimum data that must be given out, which would be for grades, et cetera, and identify that specifically what that data is, and then anything other than that must require the parents' permission. I mean, written permission, and I think that's where so many are at. And so I'll ask: is there a way, as we go forward on this bill, is there a way we can identify what that data is, and as minimum data? And then if we want to go further than that, we ask the parent for their written authorization. I guess that's what I'm going to ask. Is there a way for us to go down? I think that's what most people are upset about. We talk a little bit about what that is, but we really don't get into specific terms. And I guess that's what I'm going to ask.
You want to?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. What is minimum data? I mean, it spells out in here.
Well, I think
they have to define.
We would have
specifically. They have to post very specifically the data that they require, and it goes online. And the reason for that data.
I think this is
what might be minimum today might be not minimum tomorrow.
Well, so this is where I appreciate we need this bill.
Sure.
We need a bill, but I would think that most parents would appreciate if we had identify what that minimum data is here in the bill, so that it cannot be fuzzy.
Do you know how many agencies there are?
I don't care how many agencies there is. I guess I'll be honest with you, but we ought to say what the minimum data is, and then from that point forward say it has to go. Because if we don't write it down here, no one's going to, it basically says, trust government, will take care of you. And I don't think many of us, I don't think the public right now believes that will happen, whether it's the federal government or state government or even local government. I don't think anybody believes that unless we identify what that minimum data that we're saying can be given out. And then anything on top of that must be with written parental. Does that, I mean, I guess that's...
You'd have to deal with every agency, every database. That would be almost impossible.
So that's why we really want to have some restrictions to make sure this is not given to folks like third-party vendors.
I heard what you said. I got that down.
Yeah. Can I address
I mean, some of these things are just practically impossible.
Well, it may be impossible to stop it, but it's not impossible to restrict it being given to people that don't need it and to punish those that do it improperly.
I got it right here.
But FERPA, the section on Amendment 7
I guess I'm through.
states that parties to which the FERPA allows the release of information contained in a student's educational record without the consent of the student or the student's parent or legal guardian. So that's the part that I object to in it, because that's already what FERPA allows. So inserting
that's
that
FERPA law. That's just
you can go that's what it allows. You can restrict it beyond that. And 7 for trying to have different types of rules in terms of people that violate FERPA or violate the law. Your Amendment 8 says that you're going to go back to just whatever FERPA allows for punishment.
I
which is
said
nothing.
that. This only affected the federal side of it. We said we were going to get into the state, and we will do that. And I've already assured everyone that before this bill goes on the floor, we will
Okay.
have penalties for the state side of it.
All right.
We have that's the federal piece that I mentioned early.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay.